All right, guys. This is part 4. This will be the last part of chapter 1. Just 2 slides, real quick. Some of these chapters take a little bit more time to get through. Chapter 1 is one of the longer ones. This chapter is or this lesson is 34 slides. Some of the others are really quick, just so you just kind of FYI. So, anyways, we talked at the end of the last part about critical theory and cultural studies. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. Just know that critical theorists and cultural studies scholars are a little bit different than traditional mass communication social scientists who do experimental work, experimental design. Okay, and I'll talk more about that later. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And I also apologize if there's a little bit of background noise. My wife and kids came home. My kids have a couple of their friends playing out in the living room. So, but I think you should be able to hear me fine. And if not, I'll have to re-record this. But the last two things I want to talk about are television and product placement. So television is extremely powerful as a transmitter of culture, right? And one scholar, a guy by the name of George Gerbner, developed a theory all about television that he called cultivation theory. And I'll talk more about this later in the term and you'll read about it. But basically, cultivation theory suggests that television cultivates attitudes. That when we watch television, we our perceptions of reality and our attitudes change. And specifically, they change to reflect the television world. So we no longer think about reality in real terms, but our perception of reality starts to reflect the television world, if that makes sense. So for instance, according to George Gerbner, according to cultivation theory, if you watch a lot of TV, you will think that the world is meaner, more violent than it actually is. Why? Because there's a ton of violence on TV. Way more violence on TV than there is in real life, fortunately, right? So people that watch a lot of TV tend to over exaggerate the amount of violence that there is in the world. They ask them questions like, what do you think the chances that you'll get murdered are? And people that watch a lot of TV exaggerate it. They're like, oh yeah, there's a pretty decent chance I'm going to get murdered. Whereas people that don't watch much TV, they are more realistic. And they say, well, there's a very, very tiny chance that I'm going to get murdered at some point in my life. And statistically, it's obviously, for people living in this society, very small chances that you're going to get murdered. So, anyways, um, somebody might ask, does this theory still hold true in the modern era? Because cultivation theory was originally developed way back in the 1960s and early 70s when there were like 3 channels in America: ABC, NBC, and CBS. And so everyone was watching the same things. And Gerbner argued that people are watching the same stories over and over and over again, right? And so their attitudes are being cultivated. They're seeing the same message over and over again. But now you could argue that there are hundreds of shows, hundreds of channels. And so maybe it's more difficult to cultivate a specific attitude. But surprisingly, perhaps, or maybe not, depending on your perspective, there's still a ton of evidence for cultivation theory. They've done hundreds of these studies. They keep doing them. And even though there isn't one story now, there's or two or three, there are many stories, they continue to find a cultivation effect or cultivation effects. Product placement has become very important. Some of you probably already know what this is, but product placement is when advertisers put their products in TV shows and in the movies in really subtle ways. They place them. So, for instance, you'll be watching a movie or whatever, and this isn't a good example, but you'll be watching Seinfeld, and Jerry takes a swig of some Coke, and you can see it real clearly, Coke, right? And that's an example of product placement. That's not free. Coke, you have to understand this. Coke paid for that to be there. Um, and companies now are increasingly going to product placement because people are watching TV shows, they're watching movies, and they're not watching ads. A lot of people are flipping the channels, or on Netflix or whatever. They don't have to they don't have to watch the commercials. So or they buy the DVD. And so how are we going to advertise to people? Well, we use product placement. And it's a really effective form of advertising because it's so subtle. You probably don't even notice it half the time or more, right? But now that I've told you about this, if you've never heard about it before, the next time you watch TV or watch a movie, you'll start to notice this. And it actually gets kind of annoying sometimes because it's like um, it's very ubiquitous. It's everywhere on TV. Um, an example of this is the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. Some of you probably saw that movie, but they were doing product placement there for FedEx. That's where he worked for FedEx, and so the FedEx logo was everywhere. So was Wilson, right? The ball that he developed a friendship with, right? Mr. Wilson, he called him. So that was another example from that movie. Wayne's World. That's a little bit before your time. Back in I think that movie was released in the early '90s. I still remember when that came out. I was in high school. But Pizza Hut was the big company there, and Pizza Hut was everywhere in that movie. And if you think of other, movies, you'll be able to think of other examples. But next time you're watching TV, you're watching, The Big Bang Theory or How I Met Your Mother or whatever, just pay attention. They'll have little, cereal boxes in the background, or, they'll be drinking a certain beverage or using a certain product or whatever. I was watching, it was really obvious and blatant. I was watching The Big Bang Theory recently, and what's her name? The girl, Penny. She goes, she was wearing some new shoes or something, and somebody complimented her on the shoes, and she goes, and she made a joke out of it somehow, but she said they were only $15.99 at Target or something like that, and she actually mentioned Target. She said, I got these at Target, and so that was like so obvious, like, okay, that's an Target paid for that. I mean, it's not like they just work that into the script. If they're not getting paid, they'll just say something else. They'll just say some generic name. But so it's name recognition. It's really effective because it's believable, because it's subtle. It's super innocent because we don't feel like we're being advertised to when you get product placement. When you see a commercial, you're like, oh, they're trying to sell me something. But in product placement, you don't really feel that way. So that's why it's so effective. That's it for chapter 1. Stay tuned for chapter 2.